At my son's funeral. His wife told me I couldn't sit in the front row, so I stood up and exposed her affair to everyone. Subscribe to see more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I watched my son walk through the front door of my Beacon Hill mansion, his expression unreadable. Our weekly dinners had become increasingly strained over the past year, but I maintained the tradition. Stubborn, perhaps, a trait William inherited from me. Mother, I have news. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he poured himself a scotch, his father's brand. At 45, William had his father's stature but my sharp features. The divorce 5 years ago had hollowed him out, left him wary of connection. I'm getting married. The crystal glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Married? To whom? Her name is Vanessa Collins. She's a clinical psychologist, Stanford educated. How long have you known her? I kept my voice neutral, though alarm bells were already ringing. 6 months. He finally looked up, defiance in his eyes. The wedding is in March. I've spent 50 years in real estate, evaluating character and detecting falsehoods. It wasn't motherly paranoia speaking when I said, "That seems rushed, William." His shoulders tensed. Not everyone takes decades to make decisions like you, Mother. I only meant, I know exactly what you meant. He set his glass down hard. You didn't approve of Caroline either, and look how right you were about that disaster. The bitterness in his voice cut deep. Yes, I'd had reservations about his first wife, reservations that proved devastatingly accurate when she emptied their accounts and disappeared with her personal trainer. I'm not asking for your approval this time, he continued. I'm informing you as a courtesy. I folded my hands to hide their trembling. May I at least meet her before the wedding? She's eager to meet you too. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. She says she's heard so much about the great Eleanor Blackwood. The dinner that followed was a mechanical exchange of business updates and Boston gossip. When William left, he barely brushed his lips against my cheek, a gesture emptier than no kiss at all. Alone in my study afterward, I stared at the skyline I'd helped reshape with Blackwood Developments. My late husband had inherited a modest real estate company. Together, we'd built an empire. After his death 15 years ago, I'd continued alone, doubling our holdings, all for William. Everything for William. I opened my laptop and typed Vanessa Collins, psychologist, Stanford, into the search bar. Something felt wrong about this sudden engagement. My son, still wounded from his divorce, falling for someone so quickly? I'd developed an instinct for danger across decades of high-stakes negotiations. My phone buzzed with a text from William. Be nice to her, Mother. Vanessa is my future. Don't make me choose. I closed my eyes, feeling the chess pieces shifting on a board I couldn't fully see. Someone was making a move against my family, against everything I'd built. And for the first time in many years, I wasn't sure how to counter it. The March wedding was a spectacle of wealth and influence, exactly what I'd expect from a woman who'd known my son for only 9 months. I sat in the front row, draped in Dior, wearing the practiced smile that had closed billion-dollar deals across 5 decades. Vanessa floated down the aisle like a vision in white, her beauty undeniable. 28 years old, nearly 2 decades younger than William. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. Throughout the reception, I observed, people think that at 73, you become invisible. They're wrong. You become a better watcher. Vanessa circulated among Boston's elite with practiced ease, dropping the right names, laughing at the right moments. But 3 times, I caught her in whispered conversation with a man I didn't recognize. Each time, they separated quickly when others approached. Who is that man? I asked Jonathan, my security consultant, disguised as my +1. Marcus Taylor, he replied, checking his phone. Attorney specializing in estate law. Bar complaints in 3 states, all mysteriously dropped. I watched Marcus exchange a look with Vanessa across the room, a glance loaded with meaning. Their connection seems intimate. Jonathan nodded. I'll look deeper. 2 months later, Vanessa and William moved into my home. To take care of me, they said, though I'd been managing perfectly well. The true agenda became clear within weeks. First came the business meetings where Vanessa would speak for William. Mother's getting confused lately, she'd tell my executives with a concerned frown. William thinks it's best if we handle the details. Then came the redecorating. Family photos disappeared, replaced by sterile modern art. My husband's books, William's childhood trophies, all packed away because they collected dust. Where are my things? I demanded one evening. Finding my study transformed into a stark, minimalist space. "We've stored them safely," Vanessa soothed, her hand on William's arm. "The doctor says reducing clutter helps prevent falls at your age." "What doctor? I haven't seen any doctor." "See what I mean?" Vanessa whispered to William, just loud enough for me to hear. "The memory lapses are getting worse." William looked at me with pity that turned my stomach. "Mother, Dr. Simmons examined you last month. Don't you remember?" The lie was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I straightened my spine and met Vanessa's calculating gaze. "I've never met a Dr. Simmons in my life." "This is exactly what he warned us about," Vanessa said, tears welling in her eyes. "The denial stage can be hardest on the family." When I tried to argue, William erupted. "Enough, Mother. Vanessa is trying to help. Why must you fight every change?" Later, alone in my bedroom, the one space they hadn't yet transformed, I made a call to Rebecca, my former assistant who had retired 6 months earlier. "I need information," I said quietly, "and I need someone I can trust." May arrived with Boston in full bloom, but inside the mansion, something poisonous was growing. I began keeping a digital journal, password protected and hidden within accounting files, a skill I'd learned while modernizing our business systems years ago. In it, I documented every inconsistency, every whispered phone call, every strange behavior. The night I heard Vanessa's conversation changed everything. Unable to sleep, I'd shuffled to the kitchen for tea, when voices drifted from William's study. I moved closer, bare feet silent on marble floors. "The treatment is working faster than we expected," Vanessa was saying, her voice low but excited. "He's showing all the signs: confusion, fatigue, memory gaps." A male voice responded through what must have been a speakerphone. "Marcus Taylor." "What about the old woman? Is she suspecting anything?" Vanessa laughed softly. "Eleanor? She's trying, but William doesn't believe a word she says anymore. I've made sure of that." "And the new will?" "He's signing it next week, just as we planned." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Treatment? New will? I retreated silently to my room, heart hammering against my ribs. The next morning, I studied my son across the breakfast table. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. When had he begun looking so ill? "Are you feeling all right, William?" I kept my tone casual. Before he could answer, Vanessa appeared, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just working too hard. Right, darling?" William nodded, but his eyes seemed unfocused. When he stood to leave, he swayed slightly. "Perhaps you should see Dr. Bennett," I suggested, naming the physician who'd cared for our family for decades. "William already has excellent care with Dr. Simmons," Vanessa interjected smoothly. "No need to bother your old friend." That afternoon, I called Rebecca from a burner phone I'd asked my housekeeper Martha to purchase. "I need to meet James Holden," I said when she answered. "The former financial crimes detective?" "Eleanor, what's happening?" "I believe my son is being poisoned." Silence stretched between us before Rebecca responded. "The Westfield Gardens. 2 o'clock tomorrow. I'll arrange everything." James Holden was a compact man with watchful eyes and a reputation for discretion. We met in a secluded corner of the botanical garden where the burbling fountains would mask our conversation. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, "Rebecca briefed me on your concerns. I understand you believe your daughter-in-law is drugging your son and manipulating his finances." "I know how it sounds," I replied, clutching my handbag. "But William has changed, physically, mentally, and there are calls, meetings with a lawyer named Marcus Taylor." James nodded, taking notes. "Has your son always trusted this woman's judgment over yours?" "Never. That's what's most alarming. William and I built this business together after his father died. Now he doesn't consult me on anything." "And you believe your daughter-in-law is working with this attorney to gain control of your assets?" "I overheard them discussing a new will." James looked up sharply. "That accelerates our timeline. I'll need to move quickly." As we parted, he handed me a small device. "Wear this when you're with them. It looks like a brooch, but records audio. We need evidence." I pinned it to my blouse, a cold weight against my chest, lighter than the dread settling in my stomach, but heavy with purpose. July brought stifling heat and the confirmation of my worst fears. James Holden sat across from me in a nondescript hotel room, spreading photographs across the bed. "Vanessa Collins isn't who she claims to be," he said, pointing to surveillance images. "She meets with Marcus Taylor 3 times a week at this motel outside Cambridge. The photos showed Vanessa embracing Marcus in ways no married woman should embrace a business associate. But it was the next set of images that stopped my heart. These were taken 4 and 6 years ago, James continued, placing older photographs beside the recent ones. Different names, different cities, same modus operandi. 2 elderly men, both looking frail and confused, with a younger Vanessa by their side. Death certificates, probate records. Both men died of apparent heart failure within a year of marriage. Both left everything to their new young wife. No charges were ever filed. My hands shook as I arranged the evidence. Have you been able to verify the Stanford credentials? Fabricated. Expertly, but definitely fake. She's never been a licensed psychologist. I gathered the materials into a leather portfolio. I need to show William. Tonight. Back at the mansion, I found my son in his study, looking gaunt. I'd rehearsed what to say, how to present the evidence compassionately but firmly. William, there's something you need to see. He looked up, his eyes yellowed and unfocused. Mother? What is it? I sat beside him, opening the portfolio. It's about Vanessa. She's not who you think she is. As I explained, showing him the photographs and documents, his expression shifted from confusion to anger. These are obviously doctored, he snapped, pushing the portfolio away. You've always been jealous of any woman in my life. William, please, look at the evidence. She's been meeting with this lawyer. My wife is entitled to legal counsel. His voice rose, color flooding his pale cheeks. You've never accepted her. Never given her a chance. She's poisoning you, I said desperately. Look at yourself. You're sick, William. He stood abruptly, swaying slightly. The only toxic presence in my life is you. The study door opened, and Vanessa appeared, concern perfectly arranged on her beautiful face. Is everything all right? I heard shouting. William gestured to the scattered photos. Mother has hired someone to follow you, to fabricate evidence against you. Vanessa's eyes widened, tears immediately welling. She rushed to William, clutching his arm. Why does she hate me so much? Pack your things, Mother, William said coldly. I want you out of this house. This is my house, I reminded him, standing my ground. Built by your father and me, and left to me in his will, William countered. Legally, I can evict you. Vanessa sobbed theatrically into William's shoulder. I looked at my son, my brilliant, strong son, now a puppet dancing on his wife's strings. William, I said softly, something is very wrong. Please, get tested for toxins. For just a moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. Then Vanessa whispered something in his ear, and the moment passed. Goodbye, Mother, he said, turning away. As they left the study, I caught Vanessa's expression over her shoulder, the tears instantly gone, replaced by a cold smile of triumph. August arrived with a suffocating heat wave. Relegated to the east wing of my own home, I maintained communication with my allies through Martha, my housekeeper of 30 years and the only staff member Vanessa hadn't replaced. Dr. Bennett is here to see you. Ma'am, Martha announced one afternoon. Shall I show him in? Richard Bennett had been our family physician since William was a child. Now approaching 70 himself, he still maintained a sharp mind and steady hands. Eleanor, he greeted me, his face grave as Martha closed the door. James Holden briefed me on the situation. Can you examine William? He won't listen to me, but he might agree to see you. Richard shook his head. Vanessa has blocked my calls, but there's something else you should know. He lowered his voice. Before retiring from the FBI, I specialized in toxicology investigations. My breath caught. You believe he's being poisoned too? The symptoms you've described are consistent with several slow-acting toxins. We need a sample. Blood, hair, even fingernail clippings. That won't be easy, I said. I'm barely allowed near him anymore. That evening, I made a rare appearance at dinner, wearing the recording brooch James had given me. William looked worse, thinner, his movements sluggish. Vanessa hovered, cutting his meat, adding something to his wine when he looked away. A toast, I suggested suddenly, lifting my glass. To family. Vanessa smiled thinly, raising her glass. William followed suit. In a movement I'd practiced all afternoon, I stumbled slightly, bumping the table. Oh, how clumsy of me. In the commotion, I switched William's glass with mine. Hours later, lying in bed, I felt the room spinning. My vision blurred, my heart racing irregularly. With trembling fingers, I pressed the emergency button on my phone. A direct line to Dr. Bennett. Poison, I whispered when he answered. In the wine. What followed were fragments of consciousness. Richard's voice giving urgent instructions, the wail of an ambulance, white hospital corridors. When I fully awakened, Richard sat beside my bed, his expression grim. Aconitine, he said. Plant-based toxin that mimics heart failure, nearly impossible to detect in standard tests. The wine glass? Being analyzed. The dose wasn't lethal, thankfully, but we have proof now. I pushed myself upright, despite the protest of my muscles. We need to save William. Eleanor, listen to me. Vanessa knows you've interfered. You're in danger if you return to that house. My son is dying, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm not abandoning him. 3 days later, I returned home in a wheelchair, a precaution insisted upon by the hospital, but useful for the image I needed to project. Vanessa greeted me with a solicitous smile that didn't reach her eyes. We were so worried, she said as William looked on, confused. Weren't we, darling? When they said you'd collapsed? Just a silly spell, I replied weakly. Nothing to worry about. That night, I heard them arguing. William's voice raised in rare anger. What were these doing in your drawer? Pills that aren't prescribed to either of us? My heart leapt. Was William finally seeing through the facade? The next morning, I woke to Martha shaking me gently, tears streaming down her face. Ma'am, she whispered, it's Master William. He's gone. The next weeks passed in a blur of grief and calculated moves. William's body was whisked away for an autopsy that Vanessa fought vigorously to prevent. The official cause of death, heart failure. No toxicology tests were ordered, despite Dr. Bennett's insistence. I moved through arrangements like a ghost, watching Vanessa play the devastated widow to perfection. Her black designer dresses, her carefully dabbed tears, her trembling hands clutching sympathy cards, all precisely calibrated for maximum effect. Martha became my eyes and ears in the main house, reporting Vanessa's frenetic activity, meetings with bankers, late-night calls with Marcus, documents being shredded by the boxful. She's moving quickly, James warned during our clandestine meeting in a church garden. Liquidating assets, transferring funds offshore. Once that money leaves the country, it's gone. The funeral is tomorrow, I said. Then the will reading immediately after. Are you prepared for what that will says? James asked gently. I nodded. William changed it. I have no illusions about that. We need more time to build the case. The FBI is interested, but they need concrete evidence of criminal intent. Back at the mansion, I found Vanessa in William's study, my husband's study before that, sorting through papers. Planning your escape? I asked from the doorway. She didn't even flinch. Planning for my future, Eleanor. Something you should have done better. My son is barely cold. Your son, she said, finally looking up, made his choice. He chose me, and now everything he built, everything you built, is mine. You killed him, I said simply. Vanessa smiled, unruffled. Grief makes people say terrible things. Perhaps it's time we discussed moving you to a facility better equipped for someone in your condition. I'm not leaving this house. The decision isn't yours anymore. She held up a document. Medical power of attorney. William signed it last month. I can have you committed for evaluation if I believe you're a danger to yourself. I stepped back, my hand gripping the doorframe for support, not from weakness, but to stop myself from lunging at her. The funeral is at 11, Vanessa continued, returning to her papers. Try to be presentable. And Eleanor, I've arranged the seating. You'll be in the back, with the distant relatives. That night, alone in my room, I removed the backup hard drive I'd kept hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice. Every recorded conversation, every photograph James had taken, every medical report, all copied and secured. I opened William's last birthday card to me, running my fingers over his handwriting. To the strongest woman I know, he'd written. You taught me that battles aren't always won by those who shout loudest, but by those who plan furthest ahead. My son had been brilliant before Vanessa clouded his mind. He'd learned strategy from me, patience from his father. I would honor him with both. The morning of the funeral, I dressed carefully in a black Chanel suit that had witnessed 30 years of business triumphs. I pinned my silver hair into a severe bun and added a single strand of pearls, a gift from my late husband. Martha helped me with my shoes, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Blackwood, she whispered, whatever happens today, I'm with you. I squeezed her hand. Thank you, Martha. After today, everything changes. The weight of the recording device in my pocket felt like a weapon, which, in many ways, it was. The church was filled with Boston's elite, politicians, business associates, socialites, most of whom knew William only superficially. I watched from the vestibule as they greeted Vanessa, murmuring sympathetic platitudes while eyeing her black Valentino dress that hugged her figure inappropriately tight for a widow. I entered last, leaning on a cane, a necessary support after my collapse rather than a prop. Heads turned, conversations paused. I made my way slowly toward the front, where Vanessa stood beside the closed casket. She moved to intercept me, her perfect mask of grief slipping for just a moment. "Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet, "I've saved you a seat in the 5th row. I know how emotional you get, and we wouldn't want a scene." The implied message was clear to everyone watching. The senile mother, too unstable to be trusted with proper grieving. "My son," I said, my voice steady. "My only child. And you would deny me a place beside him?" "This front section is for immediate family," she replied, her hand on my arm steering me away from the casket. "I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. This public humiliation was calculated, cementing her position as William's true family while relegating me to the periphery. "Of course," I said, allowing myself to be led to a seat far from my son's body. I felt the weight of pitying glances as I sat alone, the matriarch displaced. The service proceeded with practiced solemnity. A minister who had never met William spoke of his generous spirit. Colleagues praised his business acumen. None captured the brilliant, complex man I had raised. Then Vanessa took the podium, dabbing at dry eyes with a black handkerchief. "My beloved husband," she began, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "My partner, my soulmate, taken from me, from us, far too soon." I watched her performance, noting how her gaze occasionally flicked to the side door where Marcus Taylor stood partially hidden. The connection between them was palpable, at least to me. "William and I had so many plans," she continued. "Dreams we'll never fulfill now, but I promise to honor his legacy, to carry forward the Blackwood name with the dignity and purpose he valued so deeply." Her eyes found mine in the crowd, a flash of triumph behind the veil of sorrow. Some people never understood what William and I shared, the depth of our connection. But those who truly knew him, who supported our love without judgment, you know what we meant to each other. The message was aimed at me like an arrow. She was rewriting history in front of everyone who mattered in Boston, painting herself as the devoted wife and me as the disapproving mother who never accepted their love. After the service, we processed to the cemetery. I stood at the edges of the gathering, watching Vanessa accept the folded flag, her shoulders shaking with well-timed sobs. When the crowd began to disperse, Marcus approached her, their conversation just within my earshot as I lingered by a nearby headstone. "Everything's in place," he murmured. "The reading is at 2. By 3, we can start the transfers." "And the old woman?" Vanessa asked, not bothering to look in my direction. "Once the will is read, she's irrelevant. The power of attorney gives you everything you need to handle her appropriately." Their meaning was clear. Once they had control of the assets, I would become an inconvenience easily dispatched. Another tragic accident, perhaps, or a sudden health crisis. As I turned to leave, Vanessa called out sweetly, "Eleanor, the car is waiting to take us to the law office. It's time to hear William's final wishes." I nodded, gripping my cane tighter. Little did she know I had wishes of my own. The law office of Caldwell and Partners occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Boston Harbor. I sat across from Preston Caldwell, who had managed Blackwood legal affairs for 20 years, his expression carefully neutral as he prepared to read my son's final testament. Vanessa sat beside me, her veil pushed back now, Marcus Taylor conspicuously present as her emotional support. 6 other people completed our grim assembly. 2 Blackwood executives, Rebecca, officially present as my former assistant, Dr. Bennett, James Holden, introduced as my financial advisor, and a court stenographer to record the proceedings. "Before we begin," Preston said, "I must note for the record that this testament supersedes all previous wills and was executed 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, when William was already showing significant symptoms of poisoning." I kept my face impassive. The will's contents were exactly as I'd expected. Vanessa received everything: The house, the business interests, the investment portfolios. I was granted a modest monthly stipend and 90 days to vacate the property. Blackwood Enterprises would transfer entirely to Vanessa's control, with Marcus Taylor named as chief counsel. Vanessa maintained a perfect expression of sorrowful gratitude, while the executives shifted uncomfortably. Even Preston seemed disturbed by the document he was reading. "Is there anything else?" I asked when he finished. Preston hesitated. "There is one additional item. A letter left in William's personal safe, addressed to you." He handed me a sealed envelope. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "What is that? Why wasn't I informed?" "It was placed there before your marriage," Preston explained. "Mr. Blackwood gave explicit instructions that it was to be delivered to his mother privately upon his death." I tucked the envelope into my handbag without opening it. "Thank you, Preston." "Now," Vanessa said, composure regained, "about the transition of the company assets." "If you'll excuse me," I interrupted, rising with effort. "This has been quite taxing. Dr. Bennett has advised me to rest." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Eleanor. James can drive you home. Or rather, to the house. We should discuss your living arrangements soon." I turned to Preston. "I'd like copies of all documents related to my son's estate, please, for my records." "Already prepared," he replied, handing me a thick envelope. "Mrs. Blackwood, may I express my deepest condolences? Your son was an extraordinary man." In the elevator, James waited until we were alone before speaking. That went exactly as expected. "Yes," I said, "they believe they've won." Back in my suite of rooms, soon to be no longer mine, I opened William's letter with trembling hands. "Mother, if you're reading this, then I fear my suspicions were correct, but realized too late. Strange things have been happening. Documents I don't remember signing, medications I don't recall being prescribed, decisions made in my name that I would never approve. I found unusual pills hidden in Vanessa's drawer last week. When I confronted her, she had an explanation, as she always does. But something in her eyes, a coldness I'd never noticed before, made me take precautions. I've collected samples, hair, blood, and the pills themselves, and sent them for independent testing under an assumed name. The results will go to Samuel, who promised to keep them safe. If I'm wrong, burn this letter and never speak of it. If I'm right, know that I'm sorry for not heeding your warnings. You always could see what I couldn't. With love and regret, William." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears finally breaking through the composure I'd maintained all day. My brilliant boy had seen the truth, but too late. Samuel, our gardener for 30 years, who had taught William to plant saplings when he was just a boy. I needed to find him immediately. Samuel Wilson's cottage sat at the edge of the Blackwood estate, partially hidden by the orchard he had tended for decades. I made my way there after dark. Using old servants' paths, I knew Vanessa wouldn't think to monitor. He answered my knock immediately, his weathered face lined with grief. "Mrs. Blackwood, I've been hoping you'd come." Inside his modest home, Samuel retrieved a locked box from beneath a floorboard. "Master William gave me this the day before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe until you came asking." The box contained vials of hair and blood samples, along with a plastic bag holding several white pills. Most importantly, there was a laboratory report confirming what Dr. Bennett had suspected, aconitine, along with several other compounds designed to mimic progressive heart failure. "He knew," I whispered. "Found the pills in her drawer," Samuel confirmed. "Said he was going to confront her again that night, the night William died." The next morning, I called an emergency meeting of what James had started calling my war council. Dr. Bennett, James Holden, Rebecca, and now Samuel. We gathered at Rebecca's apartment, safely away from Vanessa's surveillance. "The FBI is interested," James reported, "especially with the lab results, but they're proceeding cautiously. Vanessa has powerful connections through Marcus, including a federal judge who's blocking the formal investigation." "How long will that last?" I asked. "Hard to say. Weeks, maybe months." "We don't have months," Rebecca interjected. "I've been monitoring the company accounts through my old access codes. They're already liquidating assets. 3 properties sold yesterday at 20% below market value. Fire sales," I said grimly. "They're converting everything to cash as quickly as possible." Dr. Bennett spread several documents on the table. "I've compiled William's medical records from the past year. The progression shows clear evidence of systematic poisoning. weight loss, cognitive decline, cardiac symptoms that appeared suddenly despite his previous good health. "Will it be enough?" Samuel asked. "Not yet," James admitted. "We need more. Specifically, we need Vanessa to incriminate herself." I thought of the recording device I'd worn at the funeral. I may have something. Back at the mansion, I found Vanessa in William's study, now stripped of his personal items and redecorated in her minimalist style. She barely looked up when I entered. "Eleanor, I was just about to call you. We need to discuss your moving arrangements." "That's why I'm here," I said, lowering myself carefully into a chair. "I'd like to request more time." Her perfectly manicured fingers stopped typing. The will was quite clear. 90 days. It's a large house. Surely there's room for both of us. This isn't about space. She finally met my eyes. It's about moving forward, building a new chapter for Blackwood Enterprises without outdated influences. "I built this company," I reminded her, "from nothing, and now it's mine." Her smile was razor sharp. "Perhaps if you'd been more welcoming, things might have been different." "If I leave quietly," I said, leaning forward, "what do I get in return?" Interest flickered in her eyes. "What do you want?" "My personal items, my jewelry, access to my private accounts that William managed." "Reasonable requests," she said, studying me. "I'm surprised. I expected more fight from the great Eleanor Blackwood." I shrugged, affecting defeat. "What's the point? You've won. William chose you in the end." "Yes," she said, satisfaction evident in her tone. "He did." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "Eleanor, I'm hosting a reception next week to announce the William Blackwood Foundation. It would look good if you attended, for appearance's sake." "A foundation?" I paused at the door. "How charitable." "It's the perfect vehicle," she said, attention already returning to her computer. "For all sorts of transfers." I nodded and left, the recording device in my pocket capturing every incriminating word. The reception for the William Blackwood Foundation was scheduled for January 28th, exactly 1 month after William's death, and not coincidentally, the day before I was expected to vacate the mansion. The timing was no accident. It would serve as Vanessa's triumphant debut as the sole controller of the Blackwood fortune and my public dismissal. I spent the intervening weeks in careful preparation, working with my counsel to build an irrefutable case. James coordinated with FBI contacts who had quietly opened an investigation. Dr. Bennett compiled medical evidence proving William had been systematically poisoned. Rebecca tracked the rapid liquidation of Blackwood assets, documenting every suspicious transaction. Martha, still employed as housekeeper, became our inside operative, reporting Vanessa's movements and eavesdropping on conversations with Marcus. Through her, we learned the foundation was merely a shell for transferring assets offshore before Vanessa and Marcus disappeared to start new lives with new identities. 3 days before the reception, I met with Catherine Morgan, a formidable attorney I'd known for 40 years. "The evidence is compelling," she said, reviewing our files, "but timing is critical. If we move too soon, they'll destroy evidence. Too late, and the money vanishes. The reception is our opportunity," I explained. "Every major business figure in Boston will be there, along with the press. Vanessa can't resist the spotlight." Catherine nodded. "You understand the risk? She's dangerous, Eleanor. She's killed before." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "Her arrogance is our advantage." The night of the reception, I dressed with special care. A black Dior gown that conveyed both mourning and authority, my hair arranged by Martha to soften my appearance. I wanted to look exactly as Vanessa expected, the defeated elderly mother playing her assigned role. Guests filled the grand ballroom of the mansion by 7. I watched from the top of the staircase as Vanessa greeted Boston's elite, resplendent in an inappropriate red gown that whispered of celebration rather than remembrance. Marcus circulated nearby, introducing himself as the foundation's legal counsel. In one corner, I spotted a cluster of foreign businessmen, the buyers for Blackwood properties, no doubt. At precisely 7:30, I descended the stairs, leaning heavily on my cane. Conversations quieted as people noticed me, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. Vanessa glided over, taking my arm with false solicitude. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you felt well enough to join us. Let me find you a comfortable seat." She led me to a small table in the corner, far from the center of activity. "The presentation will begin soon. I'm announcing several initiatives in William's name." "How thoughtful," I murmured. As she turned to leave, I added, "Vanessa, might I say a few words about my son?" She hesitated, calculating the optics. Of course, a brief remembrance would be appropriate. The presentation began with a slickly produced video about William's vision for philanthropy, a vision he had never expressed in his life. Vanessa then took the podium, speaking eloquently about plans for educational grants and community development, all funded by the generous endowment from Blackwood Enterprises. "And now," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "William's mother would like to share a few memories." I rose slowly, making my way to the podium with deliberate effort. The room fell silent, all eyes on the frail widow being given her moment. "My son," I began, my voice quavering slightly, "was the light of my life. His father and I built Blackwood Enterprises from nothing, and William carried that legacy forward with integrity and vision." I paused, looking directly at Vanessa. "Which is why what happened to him is so tragic." The room tensed. This wasn't the gentle remembrance they expected. "William didn't die of heart failure," I continued, my voice strengthening. "He was murdered, poisoned slowly, methodically, by the woman claiming to honor him tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face froze in a rictus of shock. "Eleanor," she said, rushing toward me, "you're confused, overwhelmed by grief." "Am I?" I pressed a button on my phone, and the giant screens behind me, intended for Vanessa's presentation, suddenly displayed photographs. Vanessa and Marcus embracing in hotel rooms, documents showing Vanessa's previous identities and marriages, medical reports detailing the poison found in William's samples. "This is the true legacy being built tonight," I declared. "A foundation of lies, murder, and theft." Chaos erupted. Vanessa lunged for the podium, but before she could reach me, FBI agents emerged from among the guests, led by a grim-faced senior agent. "Vanessa Collins, you're under arrest for the murder of William Blackwood and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they led her away, she screamed accusations of my senility and instability. But the evidence playing across the screens told a different story, one that every influential person in Boston was witnessing firsthand. Marcus attempted to flee, but was caught at the service entrance where James Holden waited with local police. I remained at the podium, straight-backed and clear-eyed, no longer needing my cane as a prop. The frail, defeated woman was gone, replaced by the steel-spined businesswoman who had built an empire. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the stunned crowd, "I believe this concludes tonight's presentation." The arrest was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the case against Vanessa and Marcus expanded as investigators uncovered the full extent of their crimes. Additional charges were filed: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, attempted murder for my poisoning, and investigations reopened into the deaths of Vanessa's previous husbands. I reclaimed my position at Blackwood Enterprises, working with the board to stabilize operations after the damage Vanessa had inflicted. Properties sold under value were contested in court. Offshore transfers were frozen through international cooperation. Through it all, I visited William's grave weekly, keeping him updated on the progress of justice as if he could hear me. "The preliminary hearing is set for March," I told him one crisp February morning, arranging fresh roses against his headstone. "Catherine says the evidence is overwhelming." The media coverage had been intense. Black Widow of Beacon Hill made headlines nationwide. I declined all interview requests, focusing instead on establishing the real William Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of elder abuse and fraud. In late April, I received a call from the district attorney. "Mrs. Blackwood, we need to discuss the case. Vanessa's attorney has approached us about a plea deal." The meeting took place in a conference room overlooking the courthouse. Catherine sat beside me as the prosecutor outlined the offer. "She'll plead guilty to second-degree murder and fraud charges in exchange for revealing the location of assets we haven't yet recovered." "And her sentence?" I asked. 25 years minimum." I considered this. "And Marcus? No deal for him." "We have enough to put him away for 40 years. Catherine touched my arm. "It's a solid offer, Eleanor. It spares you a lengthy trial." "I want to see her," I said suddenly. "Before I agree." The prosecutor frowned. "That's unusual, but I can arrange it." 2 days later, I sat across from Vanessa in a prison visitation room. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. In prison orange, she looked smaller, her beauty dulled, but her eyes still calculating. "Eleanor," she said coolly, "come to gloat?" "I came to understand." I replied. Why William? He was a good man. She laughed bitterly. A good man with a billion-dollar company and a trusting nature. Do the math. There were easier targets. None with your empire. She leaned forward. You want to know the truth? He talked about you constantly. Mother built this. Mother always says. It was pathetic. Taking him was like taking a piece of you. The hatred in her eyes was raw, personal in a way I hadn't anticipated. You didn't just want the money, I realized. You wanted to destroy me. Women like you, she spat, born to privilege, looking down on everyone. I watched my mother clean houses for women like you, work herself to death while they complained about water spots on their crystal. So this was revenge. This was against women you never knew, against a world that decides who matters based on their last name. Her smile turned cruel. How does it feel, Eleanor, to know you couldn't protect your precious son? I stood, straightening my jacket. I've heard enough. Accept the plea deal or don't. Either way, you'll never touch another dollar of Blackwood money. As I turned to leave, she called after me. He cried at the end, you know, called for his mommy. I paused at the door, then looked back at her with pity, rather than the rage she hoped to provoke. You've already lost everything, Vanessa. You just don't know it yet. Outside, Catherine waited anxiously. Well, tell the DA we accept the deal, I said, but add one condition. She serves her sentence in maximum security, far from Massachusetts. I want her to fade into obscurity, forgotten. That evening, alone in William's study, restored now with his books and photographs, I poured 2 glasses of his favorite scotch, placing one beside his picture. It's done, I told him. Not the ending we would have chosen, but justice nonetheless. The house felt emptier without him, but I'd survived loss before. Tomorrow, the foundation would review its first grant applications. Next week, Blackwood Enterprises would break ground on a new development. Life would continue, shaped by his absence, but driven by his memory. I raised my glass in a silent toast. Some called it revenge. I called it a mother's final duty. July 2025. 6 months after Vanessa's plea deal and sentencing. Summer heat shimmered over Boston as I stood on the steps of the newly opened William Blackwood Center for Elder Justice, cutting the ceremonial ribbon amid applause from community leaders and advocates. This center, I announced to the gathered crowd, will provide legal aid, medical resources, and support services to elderly victims of abuse and exploitation. No one should face such battles alone. The center represented just one facet of William's true legacy. Blackwood Enterprises had recovered from Vanessa's damage. With new leadership I personally vetted. The William Blackwood Foundation had already distributed grants to organizations fighting elder abuse nationwide. After the ceremony, Rebecca, now the foundation's executive director, joined me for lunch on the mansion's terrace. The FBI closed their investigation on Vanessa's previous husbands, she reported. Officially ruled as homicides, though she'll never face trial for those crimes. The families have closure, I said. That matters more than additional charges. Rebecca studied me over her iced tea. You seem at peace. Not peace, I corrected. Purpose. The mansion no longer felt haunted by loss. I'd repurposed spaces, creating a library open to community scholars in the East Wing and converting William's suite into a memorial displaying his achievements and passions. Martha had been promoted to house manager, overseeing a staff that now included several seniors who might otherwise have faced employment discrimination. Samuel continued tending the gardens, now featuring a memorial grove of native trees planted in William's honor. Dr. Bennett had joined the center's advisory board, bringing his expertise in recognizing signs of elder abuse. James Holden provided security consulting for both the foundation and the center. They had become my chosen family, forged in crisis and united in purpose. That evening, as summer twilight lingered, I visited William's grave with fresh hydrangeas, his favorite since childhood. The headstone, elegant black granite, bore not only his name and dates but also the inscription, "Beloved son, visionary leader, his legacy continues." I placed the flowers and sat on the marble bench nearby, speaking to him as I always did. The Morgan case was decided today. That elderly woman whose nephew was stealing her pension. She won, with our center's help. Your name is becoming associated with justice, not scandal. A young woman approached a nearby grave, placing a single rose on the marker. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. After giving her a moment of privacy, I approached carefully. I'm sorry for your loss. She looked up, startled, quickly wiping tears away. Thank you. It's my father. He died last year after marrying someone who wasn't what she seemed. The familiar pattern made my heart ache. Financial exploitation? She nodded, surprised by my perception. How did you know? I've seen it before. I offered her my handkerchief. I'm Eleanor Blackwood. Recognition dawned in her eyes. From the foundation? The case that was in the news? The same. I gestured to William's grave. My son. She studied me with new interest. They said you brought down his killer single-handedly. Not alone, I corrected. I had help. Good people who recognized injustice when they saw it. Her shoulders straightened slightly. The police said there wasn't enough evidence in my father's case, that I should just accept it and move on. I reached into my purse for a business card. Come see me at the center tomorrow. Bring whatever documentation you have. Why would you help me? She asked, confusion mixing with hope. Because your father deserved justice, I said simply, and because you shouldn't have to fight alone. As I walked back to my waiting car, I felt William's presence beside me, not as a ghost, but as a continuation. His death had created this new purpose, this unexpected chapter in my life when I'd thought the story nearly complete. The mansion glowed warmly in the distance, no longer a mausoleum of memories, but a beacon of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the center's first legal case, foundation grants to evaluate, business decisions to oversee. At 74, when many expected me to fade into comfortable retirement, I had instead become a warrior for those who couldn't fight for themselves, not the legacy I had planned, but perhaps the one I was meant to build all along. Thank you, William, I whispered to the evening air, for showing me the way forward. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. My DIL spat in my face for asking her not to yell at my grandson, so I took back the house and gave her 5 days to leave. The saliva slid down my wrinkled cheek in slow motion. The dining room went silent, the only sound my grandson Noah's muffled sob as he watched his mother, my daughter-in-law, spit in my face. How dare you undermine me in my own house, Amber hissed, her manicured finger pointing at my chest. My arthritic hands trembled as I dabbed at my cheek with a napkin. All I had done was gently suggest she not yell at Noah for spilling his juice. Such a small thing to trigger such humiliation. Amber, please, I whispered, my voice barely audible. My son Thomas stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes. Let's not start another argument, he muttered, as if I had been the one to escalate the situation. Nobody defended me. Nobody ever did anymore. I looked at my grandson's terrified face and felt something crack inside me. 3 years I'd endured this. 3 years since my heart attack, when Thomas and Amber moved into my home under the guise of taking care of me. 3 years of watching my independence slip away, along with control of my finances, my home, and my dignity. I'm sorry, I said automatically, the words bitter on my tongue. Words I'd repeated countless times since they'd taken over my life. You should be, Amber said, sitting back down and roughly wiping Noah's face. Clean up your mess, Noah. Maybe Grandma will learn from your example. I excused myself, legs shaking as I retreated to what used to be my sewing room, now converted to a cramped bedroom where I was expected to stay out of sight. I caught my reflection in the small mirror by the door. The woman staring back at me looked defeated, shrunken, a stranger. This wasn't the first indignity, but something about being spit on, literally spit on, in the house I'd owned for 40 years, in front of my grandson, broke something fundamental inside me. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in my lap, and made a decision. I wouldn't die like this, powerless, humiliated, a prisoner in my own home. I had spent my life being reasonable, accommodating, understanding. Where had it gotten me? The woman who raised 2 children alone after Edward's death, who managed household finances and taught mathematics to generations of students, was still in here somewhere. I just needed to find her. I heard Noah's soft knock at my door. Grandma? He whispered. Are you okay? I wiped my eyes quickly. Come in, sweetheart. His small face appeared, eyes still red from crying. I'm sorry Mom was mean to you. I pulled him close, smelling his clean hair. It's not your fault, Noah. Not at all. Dad says we have to be patient with you because you're old and sick. he said innocently. I froze, then carefully asked, "What else does your dad say about me?" Noah looked down. "That soon you'll go to a special place where people will take better care of you than we can." In that moment, with my grandson's innocent revelation, I knew this wasn't just unkindness. This was calculated, and I had to fight back before it was too late. The two-story colonial in Westfield, Massachusetts that Edward and I bought as newlyweds no longer felt like mine. My oil paintings had been replaced with Amber's modern prints. My books were boxed up in the basement because they collected dust. Even my bedroom, the master suite where Edward and I had spent 40 years, now belonged to Thomas and Amber. While I was relegated to the tiny guest room downstairs, I limped past what used to be my garden, now neglected, toward the kitchen. My hip ached from sleeping on the too-soft mattress they'd purchased without consulting me. "Mom, you're up early," Thomas said, not looking up from his phone. He was dressed for work, expensive watch glinting on his wrist, a watch I'd never seen before. "Remember your pills." "I've been taking my own medication for 15 years, Thomas," I said quietly. "And now you have us to remind you," he replied with that patronizing smile. "We don't want another scare like last month. Last month when Amber found me unconscious, though I have no memory of fainting. Last month when they used that incident to take away my car keys permanently. I'd managed just fine for 12 years after Edward's death. I paid bills on time, kept the house maintained, even took a cruise with my church friends. Everything changed 3 years ago with my heart attack. During my recovery, Thomas offered to help temporarily with paperwork. Medicated and weak, I'd signed a power of attorney I believed was limited. 1 month later, Thomas and Amber sold their condo and moved in to take care of me. Within weeks, they controlled my bank accounts, medical appointments, and social calendar, which quickly dwindled to nothing. "Your oatmeal's getting cold," Amber said, sweeping into the kitchen in her workout clothes. "Thomas, did you remind your mother about her pills?" They spoke about me as if I weren't there, a habit that had become so common I sometimes wondered if I'd already died. "I need to go to the pharmacy today," I said, trying to sound casual. "And maybe the library." Amber and Thomas exchanged a look. "I'll pick up your prescription," Amber said. "It's too cold for you outside." It was 65 degrees. "I can take the bus," I insisted. "I've been using public transportation since before you were born." "And risk another fall?" Thomas shook his head. "Mom, be reasonable. That's why we're here." What could I say? That I suspected they were stealing from me? That I felt like a prisoner? That I'd heard them discussing memory care facilities when they thought I was asleep? So I nodded and ate my cold oatmeal, feeling the walls closing in further. Later, alone in my room, I examined the bruise on my arm from where Amber had gripped me last week when I tried to answer my own phone. Small indignities piled up like snowflakes, eventually becoming an avalanche that buried the person I used to be. I opened my nightstand drawer, touching the small notebook where I'd begun documenting everything. Dates, incidents, overheard conversations. Not that anyone would believe an old woman with a heart condition over her devoted caretakers, but as I stared at the faded photograph of Edward and me on our 30th anniversary, I made a silent promise I would find a way out, somehow. The house was finally empty. Thomas at work, Amber at her spin class, Noah at school. 3 hours of solitude, a rare gift these days. I moved through the quiet rooms, touching familiar surfaces. My fingers traced the dining table Edward had refinished by hand, now covered with Amber's gaudy placemats. I passed the wall where our family photos once hung, replaced with abstract prints that meant nothing to me. I needed my photo albums, the real ones, not the sanitized digital versions Thomas kept on his computer. I knew they'd been boxed up in the hallway closet to protect them, Amber had claimed. The step stool wobbled slightly as I reached for the top shelf. My hip protested, but determination pushed me upward. My fingers brushed the cardboard box when my balance shifted. I grabbed the wall to steady myself, pressing against a section of paneling. It moved. I froze, then pressed again. The panel slid sideways, revealing a small recessed compartment, Edward's hidden wall safe. My breath caught. I hadn't forgotten its existence, but Thomas had renovated this hallway 3 years ago, covering the access with new paneling. "We're updating, Mom," he'd explained while I was still weak from the hospital. When I'd asked about the safe later, he'd assured me he'd transferred all important documents to his office for better security. My fingers, gnarled with arthritis but suddenly steady, turned the combination, Edward's birthday, then mine. The lock clicked open. Inside lay our original wills, insurance policies, and Edward's investment journal, the meticulous records he'd kept of every financial decision. As I scanned the documents, confusion gave way to disbelief, then to a cold, clarifying anger. According to these papers, I should have a substantial monthly income from Edward's investments and pension. I should own not just this house, but also a small rental property downtown that Edward had purchased as an investment before his death. Yet I lived on a meager allowance that barely covered my medications. I depended entirely on Thomas and Amber, who controlled all my accounts. My hands trembled as I flipped through bank statements. The rental property was still generating income, but the deposits went to an account I didn't recognize. My investment dividends showed regular withdrawals, management fees paid to Thomas's consulting company. The safe also contained a letter from Edward addressed to me, dated the week before his sudden heart attack. "Martha, my love," it began. "I've arranged everything so you'll never have to worry about money. The house is paid off, the investments are stable, and the downtown property will provide extra income. You'll be secure for the rest of your life." Secure. The word mocked me now. I carefully photographed each document with my old flip phone, the basic one Thomas had given me for emergencies only. Then I returned everything exactly as I'd found it and slid the panel closed. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding not from exertion, but from a new emotion cutting through the fog of the past 3 years. Rage. My own son had been systematically stealing from me while isolating me from friends who might have noticed. The small apartment downtown that could have been my escape was generating income that funded their lifestyle. The woman who'd meekly accepted being spit on yesterday was gone. In her place sat someone I hadn't been in years, a fighter. "Your blood pressure is concerning, Mrs. Donovan," Dr. Patel said, frowning at his monitor. "Have you been taking your medication regularly?" "Yes," I replied. "My son and his wife make sure of it." Dr. Patel had been my cardiologist for over a decade. He was one of the few people I still saw regularly outside the house. "And how are things at home?" he asked, his dark eyes studying my face. Something in his tone made me look up. In that moment, I made a decision. "May I speak with you privately?" "Doctor?" He nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Of course. Let me ask the nurse to take Thomas to fill out some forms." Once we were alone, words tumbled out. The financial control, the isolation, the daily humiliations. I showed him the photos of the documents I'd found. "Martha," he said quietly when I finished, "what you're describing sounds like elder abuse." Hearing it named so clinically made it more real somehow. "I need to admit you overnight for observation," he said. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and I'm concerned about these episodes you've described." "Thomas won't allow it," I said. "I don't need his permission," Dr. Patel replied firmly. "You're my patient, not him." That night in the hospital was my first taste of freedom in years. Thomas and Amber visited briefly, Thomas playing the concerned son perfectly, telling the nurses about my confusion and forgetfulness. In the room next to mine was Eleanor Winters, a retired attorney recovering from knee surgery. She was sharp, outspoken, and immediately saw through my carefully constructed facade of frailty. "You're not nearly as confused as your son claims," she observed after he left. I hesitated, then confessed everything. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing darker. "They're banking on your physical limitations and social isolation," she said finally. "It's textbook financial elder abuse." "I'm not good with computers," I admitted. "Thomas handles everything online." "That's exactly what they count on," Eleanor replied. "But you don't need technology to be smart." "Martha." Before her discharge, Eleanor gave me her card and the contact information for Victoria Chen, her former law partner who specialized in elder rights. "Call her," she insisted. "Your age and health don't mean you've lost the right to control your own life." That night I lay in my hospital bed planning. I needed allies, evidence, time. When Thomas came to take me home the next day, I played the role he expected, the frail mother, grateful for his care. But inside, something had shifted. I began noticing details I'd overlooked, how he always locked his office door, how Amber received packages from expensive stores while claiming my care was a financial burden, how they whispered when they thought I was napping. Using the hidden key I'd kept, a habit from when Edward frequently locked himself out, I waited until they took Noah to a weekend sports tournament to enter Thomas's office. What I found devastated me. The power of attorney I'd signed gave Thomas complete control over my finances, not temporarily as he'd explained. Bank records showed systematic transfers from my accounts to theirs. The downtown apartment was indeed rented out, but the income went straight to Thomas. Most alarming was a printed email between Thomas and a real estate agent discussing selling my house once Mom's situation is resolved. In messages with Amber, he wrote, "Dr. Greenberg agrees that with her heart condition worsening, a care facility would be best. Once she signs over the house, we can finally move forward with our plans." They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to institutionalize me against my will to take my home. With my heart literally aching in my chest, I began to photograph everything. I wasn't just fighting for my money or my house anymore. I was fighting for my life. "Just a precaution," Dr. Patel told Thomas, patting my hand. "The new medication might affect her blood pressure. 24 hours of monitoring." Thomas frowned. "I don't think that's necessary. We can monitor her at home." "I insist," Dr. Patel said firmly. As her physician, I kept my expression neutral, hiding my relief. Another night of freedom, another opportunity. In the hospital bed beside mine, Eleanor was back for her follow-up. She'd arranged it specifically to coincide with my medication adjustment. No coincidence at all. "Victoria's coming tomorrow," she whispered once we were alone. "She'll meet you here, where Thomas can't interrupt." That night, I met Judith, my friend from church and a retired nurse, in the hospital cafeteria. Thomas had gradually isolated me from my church community, claiming my health made attendance difficult. Judith was one of the few who persistently checked on me despite Amber's obvious annoyance. "I knew something was wrong," Judith said, her face tight with anger as I showed her the evidence I'd gathered. "The way they kept canceling our lunch dates, how you stopped coming to services." "I need your help," I said. "I'm not good with technology, and they watch me constantly." Judith's eyes gleamed. "They watch an old woman. They don't watch me." She patted her purse. "I've got a tablet with a camera. We'll document everything." The next morning, Victoria Chen arrived, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who reminded me of myself at that age. She reviewed my evidence with a professional detachment that somehow made the situation more manageable. "This is textbook elder abuse," she confirmed. "Financial exploitation, isolation, emotional abuse, possible medical neglect." "Can you help me?" I asked. "Yes," she said without hesitation, "but it will take time and careful planning. They'll fight back when they realize what's happening." "I've got nothing but time," I replied with a bitter smile, "and they've already taken everything else." Victoria laid out a strategy. Document everything, secure allies, build a legal case, and most importantly, pretend nothing had changed. "You need to make them think you're more dependent than ever," she explained. "The moment they suspect you're fighting back, they'll accelerate their plans." When Thomas came to take me home that afternoon, I played my part perfectly. The confused, grateful mother, too frail to manage on her own. He bought it completely. "She's declining faster than I expected," I overheard him tell Amber that night. The hospital stay confused her even more. We should move up our timeline. Their timeline. My deadline. Over the following weeks, I became the actress of a lifetime. I shuffled more, forgot small things intentionally, asked for help with tasks I could easily manage. Thomas and Amber relaxed their vigilance, convinced my mental state was deteriorating. Meanwhile, Judith visited regularly, ostensibly to help with my medications. She brought her tablet, showing me family photos, while actually documenting evidence and recording conversation. She helped me learn to use basic apps that Thomas wouldn't notice, setting up a secure email account on her tablet that I could access during her visits. Victoria worked quietly, investigating the legal documents, gathering financial records, and building a case. She discovered that Thomas had never properly activated the portion of the power of attorney that granted him control over my living arrangements, a crucial oversight. Dr. Patel scheduled regular appointments, creating legitimate reasons for me to leave the house using medical transport services that Thomas couldn't easily monitor. During these appointments, I sometimes met Victoria at her office instead. My prison was still a prison, but now I had a plan. And for the first time in 3 years, I had hope. "You're different lately," Noah observed one afternoon as we played cards in my room. "You seem sad but also stronger." out of the mouths of babes. I smiled at my grandson, the innocent caught in this web of adult greed and manipulation. Sometimes, Noah, I said carefully, people can be both sad and strong at the same time. That's what growing up teaches you. What it didn't teach me, what I was learning only now at 78, was how to fight back. Your mother needs a care facility, Thomas, Amber said, her voice drifting through the heating vent into my room. We can't keep living like this. After the house sells, Thomas replied. The market's perfect right now. What if she refuses to sign? She's been different lately. She won't refuse, and if she does, we have options. I lay perfectly still, recorder app running on the tablet Judith had slipped me. Another piece of evidence for Victoria's growing file. 2 months into my secret resistance, I'd developed a system. Judith visited 3 times weekly, ostensibly checking my medications, but actually helping document everything. Eleanor connected me with a sympathetic banker at my old branch who provided financial records without alerting Thomas. Victoria built a legal case, while Dr. Patel ensured regular medical appointments that gave me freedom to meet with my growing team of allies. I'd perfected my performance as the increasingly frail, confused mother. I shuffled more, asked simple questions repeatedly, and appeared increasingly dependent on Thomas and Amber, who grew more careless in their conversations around me. This morning, I'd accidentally knocked over my coffee, creating a distraction while Judith photographed banking documents Thomas had carelessly left on the kitchen table. My careful act had an unexpected consequence. It gave me genuine physical strength. The deliberate shuffling had strengthened my leg muscles. The mental focus required to maintain my charade had sharpened my mind. My blood pressure improved as I channeled my anger into purposeful action rather than helpless rage. She's looking worse, don't you think? Amber asked one evening, studying me across the dinner table. I kept my eyes unfocused, my hands slightly trembling as I slowly ate my soup. Definitely, Thomas agreed. Dr. Greenberg has an opening at Sunrise Valley next month. It might be time. 1 month. My timeline had accelerated. That night, I made my riskiest move yet. I called my daughter Rebecca in California. Our relationship had grown distant after Edward's death, her visits rare and calls infrequent. Her demanding architecture career and the pain of seeing the family home without her father kept her away, relying on Thomas's reports about my health. I'd been calling her cell phone for days, but she never answered numbers she didn't recognize. Finally, I left a voicemail. Rebecca, it's Mom. I'm having chest pains again. Please call. Half-truth. The stress did affect my heart. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered in the bathroom with the shower running. Mom? What's going on? Her voice, so like Edward's, brought tears to my eyes. I don't have much time, I whispered. I need you to come home. Don't tell Thomas I called. Tell him you're worried because I missed our regular call. What? Mom, you're scaring me. Please, Rebecca. I've never asked you for anything like this before. Come home. Tell Thomas it's a surprise visit. I'll explain everything then. After a long pause, she said, I'll be there tomorrow. I ended the call, hands shaking with relief and terror. This was the linchpin of Victoria's strategy. We needed Rebecca as a witness, an advocate, someone Thomas couldn't easily dismiss. As I returned to my room, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the defeated shell I'd seen months ago. My eyes were clear, my shoulders straighter, despite my deliberate stoop when others were watching. Even my face seemed different, lined with age and worry, yes, but alive with purpose. Thomas and Amber had taken my home, my money, and nearly 3 years of my life. But in fighting to reclaim them, I'd found something I thought was lost forever. Myself. Rebecca's coming tomorrow, I told Judith during her Wednesday visit, my voice barely above a whisper, despite the radio playing to mask our conversation. Thank God, Judith replied, adjusting my blood pressure cuff for show. Victoria says her presence changes everything legally. We discovered through Victoria's investigation that Amber had a history of financial fraud, a lawsuit from her first husband in Nevada that ended in a settlement. This explained their desperate need for my assets and their mounting credit card debt, which Victoria had uncovered through financial records. More disturbing was Thomas's consultation with Dr. Greenberg, a geriatric specialist, seeking an evaluation that might declare me mentally incompetent. The ethical doctor had refused without a comprehensive independent assessment, which Thomas kept postponing. They're planning to move me to a care facility next month, I told Judith. Victoria needs to accelerate our timeline. Judith nodded, her eyes fierce with protective anger. At 72, she was younger than me, but had become my most dedicated ally, risking Thomas's wrath to visit regularly. We're ready, she assured me. Eleanor's secured all the legal documentation. Victoria has the case prepared, and the banker has proof of financial malfeasance. That night, I lay awake rehearsing what I would tell Rebecca. Our relationship had grown strained over the years. She blamed Thomas's controlling nature, while I'd blamed her absence. The truth, I now realized, was that we'd both been manipulated by Thomas's careful management of information. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. Through my partially open bedroom door, I watched Thomas's genuine shock at seeing his sister on the doorstep. "Rebecca? What are you doing here?" "Surprising Mom," she said coolly, stepping past him. "It's been too long." Amber emerged from the kitchen, her smile brittle. "Rebecca, what a wonderful surprise." I shuffled out slowly, playing my role one last time. "Rebecca, is that you, dear?" Her eyes widened slightly at my performance, but she recovered quickly, embracing me. "Mom, I've missed you." For the first 2 days, Thomas and Amber performed their roles as devoted caretakers perfectly. But Rebecca, an architect trained to notice details, began seeing the cracks in their facade. My possessions missing from common areas, Amber's constant interruptions when I spoke, the tension in Noah's small body when voices were raised. On the 3rd day, when Thomas and Amber took Noah to a school meeting, I finally revealed everything to Rebecca with Judith present as witness. I showed her the documents, recordings, and financial evidence. "I should have known," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted Thomas because it was easier, because I didn't want to face this house without Dad. They counted on your absence, just as they counted on my frailty," I replied. Rebecca immediately contacted Pastor Johnson, who'd baptized both my children and known our family for decades. He confirmed noticing my gradual removal from the church community, always explained away by Thomas as my health limitations. We gathered that evening in my bedroom, Rebecca, Judith, and Pastor Johnson, finalizing our strategy. "Victoria suggests Sunday," Rebecca said, "a family gathering where they can't refuse without looking suspicious." "I'll bring Eleanor and Susan," Pastor Johnson offered. "Thomas won't question the pastor and his wife visiting." "I've invited Dr. Patel to check on you as well," Judith added. "Victoria will come as my guest." That night, as the house slept, I crept to Thomas's office with the key I'd kept hidden. I needed one final piece of evidence, confirmation of the care facility arrangements. In his email, I found it. Correspondence with Sunrise Valley Assisted Living, including a partially completed admission form with my name. The projected move-in date, 3 weeks away. My hands shook as I photographed the screen, not from fear this time, but from a cold, clarifying anger. This was my son, the boy I'd nursed through childhood illnesses, helped through college applications, stood beside at his wedding. Now, he was planning to institutionalize me against my will, to claim my house. As I quietly closed the office door, Noah appeared in the hallway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Grandma, what are you doing up?" I knelt slowly, wincing at my arthritic knees. "Just getting some water, sweetheart. What about you?" "I had a bad dream," he whispered, "about you going away." I hugged him close, his small body warm against mine. "Sometimes dreams seem very real," I said carefully. "But remember, Noah, I will always love you, no matter what happens." He nodded against my shoulder. "I heard Dad say you're confused, but you don't seem confused to me." "Out of the mouths of babes indeed. Our little secret?" I whispered. He nodded solemnly. "Our secret." As I tucked him back into bed, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Noah too, to show him that even the oldest, seemingly weakest person deserves dignity and respect. In 3 days, everything would change. I just had to maintain my performance a little longer. Sunday arrived bright and clear. I'd suggested a family lunch to celebrate Rebecca's visit, a reasonable request Thomas couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. As I set the table with shaking hands, I thought about how much had changed in 5 months. The woman whose face had been spit on would never have orchestrated what was about to happen. "Mom, let me help," Rebecca said, taking plates from my hands. She whispered, "Victoria just texted. Everything's ready. Thomas entered the kitchen, eyeing us suspiciously. "What are you two whispering about?" "Just telling Mom how nice she looks today," Rebecca replied smoothly. Thomas frowned. "You've invited quite a crowd, Mom. Is that wise with your condition?" "Just a few friends," I said, playing my role one last time. "It's been so long since I've seen anyone." "Because you get overtired," Amber interjected, entering with Noah. "We're just concerned about your health." Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. We'd agreed to wait until everyone arrived. The doorbell rang at noon precisely. Judith entered with Victoria, introducing her as my friend from book club. Pastor Johnson and his wife Susan arrived minutes later, followed by Dr. Patel and Eleanor. Thomas pulled me aside, his voice low. "Mom, this is too much excitement. You should rest." "After lunch, dear," I said mildly. "I've been looking forward to this." The meal progressed with surface pleasantries. Amber became increasingly tense as conversation flowed around her, clearly uncomfortable with so many witnesses to her usual behavior. When dessert was served, I nodded slightly to Victoria, who placed her napkin on the table. Our signal. "I'd like everyone's attention," I announced, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I've recently learned I need to make some important decisions about my home and future, and I'd value your input." Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. "Mom, you're confused again. We've discussed this." "Actually, Thomas," Victoria interrupted, standing to address the table, "your mother is perfectly lucid." "Who exactly are you?" Amber demanded. Victoria smiled coolly. "Victoria Chen, elder law attorney." She distributed folders to everyone present. "These contain documentation your mother has gathered over the past 5 months. The folders contained bank statements showing systematic diversion of my funds, a recent neurological evaluation confirming my mental competence, documentation of my downtown property ownership, transcripts of recorded conversations where Thomas and Amber discussed getting rid of the old lady, Dr. Patel's report confirming that while I had chronic conditions, I was capable of independent living with appropriate support." Thomas went pale. Amber's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous," she spluttered. "She's manipulating all of you. Everything we've done has been for her own good." "Including planning to institutionalize me without my consent?" I asked quietly. "Including stealing the income from the downtown property Edward left me? Including isolating me from my friends and church?" Noah looked between us, confusion on his small face. "You don't understand what it's been like," Thomas said desperately. "Her health, her confusion. I understand perfectly," Dr. Patel interjected. "I've been Martha's physician for 15 years. She has a heart condition that's well managed with medication. She shows no signs of cognitive impairment." Pastor Johnson spoke next. "We've all noticed Martha's absence from the community. Thomas, each time we called, you said she was too unwell for visitors." "Because she was," Amber shouted. Rebecca stood, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You controlled every aspect of her life. You took her home, her money, her independence, all while planning to discard her." The officer of justice, who had been quietly present as Victoria's assistant, stepped forward and handed Thomas and Amber legal papers. "This is a preliminary notification regarding charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and isolation," Victoria explained calmly. "The court has already granted an emergency order restoring Martha's control over her finances and property." I looked directly at my son, seeing the calculating man rather than the boy I'd raised. "This house remains mine, as it always has been," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You have 5 days to find other accommodations. Rebecca will stay with me while we resolve this situation." Thomas stared at me with disbelief that transformed into something darker, recognition that the frail, confused mother he'd manipulated was gone, replaced by the woman who had raised him, a woman who had finally found her voice again. The 5 days following Sunday's confrontation were tense beyond words. Thomas oscillated between desperate apologies and defensive justifications. "We were only trying to protect you. You didn't understand how to manage things anymore." Amber abandoned any pretense of affection, making veiled threats about Noah. "He's our son. We decide who sees him and who doesn't." They began packing, but slowly, provocatively, as if expecting me to relent. They used Noah as emotional leverage, whispering that Grandma is kicking us out. I found moments alone with my grandson to explain in age-appropriate terms that he would always be welcome in my home. On the 4th day, Thomas made one final desperate attempt. He called the police, claiming concern about my mental health. When officers arrived, they found me calmly seated with Rebecca, Victoria, Dr. Patel, and Pastor Johnson, all prepared with legal and medical documentation. Sergeant Wilson, after reviewing the situation, pulled his younger colleague aside and explained, "Classic role reversal attempt in elder abuse cases. We see this pattern often." Realizing his last gambit had failed, Thomas finally completed the move on the 5th day. They rented an apartment across town, taking Noah with them. My grandson cried as he hugged me goodbye, but I reassured him, "Grandma will always be here for you, sweetheart. That will never change." As Thomas loaded the final boxes, he paused on the porch. "I really thought I was doing what was best," he said, not meeting my eyes. "For whom?" I asked simply. He had no answer. That evening, as Rebecca and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did?" "Understanding and remorse are different paths," I replied. "I can't control which one Thomas chooses." The work was far from over. Victoria filed court proceedings to recover the funds Thomas had diverted. The banker who'd helped us found evidence that Thomas had falsified my signature on multiple documents. My downtown property required significant repairs after years of neglect. In the weeks that followed, I reclaimed my home inch by inch. My paintings returned to the walls. My books emerged from storage. I slept in my own bedroom again, surrounded by memories of Edward. Rebecca stayed for a month, working remotely to help restore order. We rebuilt our relationship in the process, healing wounds that predated Thomas's betrayal. She found a small rental nearby and began dividing her time between California and Massachusetts. The legal process moved slowly but steadily. Thomas was required to attend counseling and financial management classes. The criminal charges were conditionally suspended at my request, not for his sake, but for Noah's. Financial restitution was ordered, to be paid in monthly installments. Amber, unable to adjust to their reduced circumstances and public humiliation, eventually filed for divorce and moved to another state, leaving Thomas with primary custody of Noah, an unexpected blessing that allowed for careful rebuilding of relationships. The court established a visitation schedule allowing Noah to spend one weekend monthly with me. Thomas, after genuine therapy, began slowly acknowledging the gravity of his actions. Our relationship remained fragile, guarded, but not entirely destroyed. 6 months after the confrontation, I sat in Dr. Patel's office for a regular checkup. "Your blood pressure is better than it's been in years," he remarked, reviewing my chart. "Fighting back is good medicine, it seems," I replied with a small smile. "You've become something of an inspiration, Martha," he said. "I've referred 2 other patients to Victoria after noticing similar patterns in their lives." That evening, Eleanor called with a proposal. "The community center wants to start a support group for vulnerable seniors. Would you consider sharing your experience?" I thought about the past year, the humiliation, the fear, the slow rebuilding of my life and dignity. "Yes," I said finally. "If it helps even one person find their voice again, it's worth it." That night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, the master bedroom that was mine again. The woman who looked back at me was changed, still old, still bearing the lines of grief and struggle, but standing straight, eyes clear, a survivor. Thomas had taken nearly 3 years of my life, but in fighting to reclaim what was mine, I'd found a strength I never knew I possessed, and perhaps most importantly, I'd discovered that even at 78, it wasn't too late for a new beginning. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the confrontation, I stood in the community center addressing 20 seniors, their faces reflecting varying degrees of recognition and disbelief as I shared my story. "Elder abuse thrives in silence," I concluded. "Our generation was taught not to air family problems publicly, but silence protects the abusers, not the abused." The applause was warm, but more meaningful were the 3 people who approached afterward, quietly asking for Victoria's contact information. 3 more who might escape what I had endured. Eleanor joined me for lunch afterward. "You found your calling," she observed. "You're changing lives." "At 79, I laughed. Who would have thought? The downtown apartment Edward had purchased decades ago was finally renovated and rented to a young teacher, the rent now properly deposited into my account. The financial restitution from Thomas had funded necessary adaptations to my home, Handrails, a stair lift, bathroom modifications that acknowledged my physical limitations without compromising my independence. Rebecca hadn't returned permanently to California, instead establishing a satellite office of her architecture firm in Boston. She purchased a small house 10 minutes from mine, close enough for regular visits without either of us feeling smothered. Thomas's legal consequences had been painful but necessary. The court ordered community service, mandatory counseling, and financial restitution. The criminal charges for elder abuse remained conditionally suspended, a clemency I'd requested not for him, but for Noah's sake. Amber, unwilling to adjust to their reduced circumstances, eventually filed for divorce and relocated to Arizona, leaving Thomas with primary custody of Noah. This unexpected development created space for healing between 3 generations of our family. The court established a visitation schedule, allowing Noah to spend 1 weekend monthly with me. These visits became precious to both of us, a time free from the tension that still lingered between Thomas and me. Thomas, after months of genuine therapy, began slowly acknowledging the gravity of his actions. Our relationship remained cautious, measured, but not irreparable. His monthly letters, part of his therapeutic process, chronicled his gradual recognition of the harm he'd caused. That afternoon, I hosted the church quilting circle, something I hadn't done since before my heart attack. Judith helped arrange chairs while I prepared refreshments, moving comfortably through my reclaimed kitchen. "Martha looks 10 years younger," I overheard one woman whisper to another. Perhaps I did. Freedom has that effect. As the afternoon light streamed through windows now free of Amber's heavy drapes, Pastor Johnson's wife Susan asked me to share my story at their regional church conference. "So many seniors in our congregations are suffering silently," she explained. "Your voice could make a difference." I agreed without hesitation. The woman who had once cleaned spit from her face now stood before audiences regularly, her story helping others find courage. Later that evening, I sat with Victoria on my porch, reviewing the progress of 2 cases she'd taken on after meeting clients through our senior support group. "You've become our best referral source," she said, smiling. "The Martha effect, we call it at the office. The irony," I replied, "is that none of this would have happened if Thomas and Amber hadn't pushed me so far." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Adversity reveals character, yours and theirs." Noah was visiting that weekend. As I tucked him in that night, in the room that had been Thomas's childhood bedroom, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, are you still mad at Dad?" I considered my answer carefully. "I'm disappointed in his choices, Noah, but I still love him because he's my son, just like he still loves you even when you make mistakes." "He seems sad a lot," Noah observed. "Growing up is hard at any age," I replied. "Sometimes the hardest lessons come when we're already adults." The next morning, I watched from the kitchen window as Thomas arrived to pick up Noah. He remained on the porch, respecting the boundaries Victoria had established. Our interactions were civil, carefully choreographed, neither of us fully trusting the other yet. But as Noah ran to his father, I saw Thomas kneel to embrace him, a gesture of affection I hadn't witnessed before the divorce. Perhaps losing so much had taught him to value what remained. That afternoon, I attended a community board meeting where I'd recently been appointed to the Senior Services Committee. My voice, once silenced in my own home, now helped shape policies affecting hundreds of elderly residents. Walking home, I passed the park where Edward and I had taken our children decades ago. A sense of peace settled over me, not the passive acceptance I'd mistaken for peace during those years of abuse, but the genuine tranquility that comes from standing in your truth. At 79, I had reclaimed not just my home and finances, but my voice, my dignity, and the possibility of authentic family relationships, imperfect, scarred, but finally honest. The last act of my life had become, unexpectedly, my most powerful. "You look good, Mom." Thomas stood awkwardly on my porch, 18 months after moving out. This wasn't our usual custody exchange. Noah was at school. Thomas had requested this meeting, a first. "Thank you," I replied, not inviting him in. We still conducted our conversations on the porch or in neutral locations, a boundary I maintained despite his progress in therapy. "I've completed the financial management course," he said, hands in his pockets, "and the restitution payments are on schedule." Victoria mentioned that, I acknowledged. Silence stretched between us, mother and son, connected by blood and history, but separated by betrayal. "I've been trying to understand why I did what I did," he finally said, his voice strained. "The therapist says it was about control, about resenting you and Dad for always being so competent. Then when you got sick, I saw an opportunity to finally be in charge." He looked away. "That sounds horrible when I say it aloud." "It was horrible to live through," I replied simply. "I know." He swallowed hard. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I understand what I did now. Really understand." I studied his face, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd betrayed me, perhaps now someone trying to rebuild himself into someone better. "Understanding is the beginning," I said finally. "What matters is what you do with that understanding." He nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Noah asked if you would come to his school play next week. I'd like you to be there too. A small olive branch, not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but a tentative step forward." "I'll be there," I promised. 2 years after that Sunday confrontation, my life had transformed completely. My house was fully mine again, adapted for my needs without compromising my independence. The restored income from Edward's investments and the downtown property ensured my financial security. Rebecca had permanently relocated her architecture practice to Boston, specializing in accessible design for seniors, inspired by the modifications to my home. Our relationship, once strained by distance and misunderstanding, had deepened into friendship as well as family. The senior support group Eleanor and I started now met weekly at the community center, with Victoria offering monthly legal consultations. 3 cases of financial elder abuse had been successfully prosecuted as a direct result of seniors finding courage through our program. Noah spent every other weekend with me, time filled with baking, gardening, and stories about Edward that Thomas had never shared. At 10, he was growing into a thoughtful boy with his grandfather's kind eyes. My health had stabilized, the stress-induced spikes in blood pressure now rare. Dr. Patel joked that fighting back had been the best medicine he never prescribed. That evening, as I prepared for Noah's school play, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the defeated shell who had wiped spit from her face 3 years earlier. My posture was straight despite my arthritis. My eyes were clear and direct. Even my voice had changed, lower, steadier, no longer seeking permission to exist. At the elementary school, I sat beside Thomas in the auditorium, a careful foot of space between us. When Noah spotted us from the stage during his performance, his face lit with genuine joy at seeing his father and grandmother sitting together, if not exactly united. After the play, as Noah proudly showed us his costume, a passing teacher asked, "Is this your grandmother, Noah?" "This is my Grandma Martha," he announced with importance. "She teaches people to stand up for themselves." Thomas looked away, but not before I caught the complex emotion on his face, shame mixed with a father's pride in his son's moral clarity. Later that week, I received a letter from Amber, the first communication since her departure. She was remarried in Arizona, expecting a child, and wanted to relinquish all claims to visitation with Noah. Her letter included no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just practical matters requiring my signature as a concerned party in the custody arrangement. I signed the papers without comment. Some chapters were better closed permanently. That Sunday, as I sat in my reclaimed pew at church, Pastor Johnson's sermon touched on forgiveness, not the easy greeting card version, but the complex ongoing process that acknowledges harm while creating space for change. Afterward, Judith joined me for our weekly lunch. "Thomas seems different," she observed cautiously. "He is," I acknowledged. "Whether it's enough remains to be seen." My pacemaker regulated my physical heart, but I discovered that the heart's emotional capacity for trust, once shattered, healed much more slowly. Not everything broken could be perfectly restored. Yet as I looked around my dining room, at the walls now adorned again with my paintings, the shelves filled with my books, the garden visible through windows no longer hidden by Amber's heavy drapes, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for what I'd recovered, but for what I'd discovered in myself. At 80, I had become not just a survivor, but an advocate. The final chapter of my life had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed, a strength now helping others find their voices. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.